Well, another of our deep thinkers whose time has come, really. All this incredible experience that we have in this room, the people who've put 20, 30, 50 years into it, and all of a sudden, their time has come. Walter is a soil microbiologist and innovation strategist with immense field and research experience at every level of government in soils, grasslands, agriculture and forests, here and internationally. He's an absolute expert in what the world needs now, and apart from love, it's soil biology. Thank you, Walter.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you very, very much for having us here. And basically, we've been very, very fortunate to actually hear Terry, Peter, more or less actually go through the details of, in a sense, what we have to do at that farming level. How do we regenerate our soils? I'd like to take the discussion back to where Alan was talking about. Well, how does this actually work globally, and what's its significance, and where do we actually have to take that? But also actually then come back into the passion, soil microbiology, because as Terry mentioned, it's all about the biology. It's all about making those microbial ecological systems work. The fungi, the fungals, you know, really just making all that really work. And especially in Australia, because as we have the First Nations experience here, which the wisdom we have to learn from, we also have 46 million years of evolution of nature having evolved exquisite, efficiently systems, microbial systems that actually make our soils, even though it's the driest inhabited continent, some of the oldest leached soils, but we have this immense productivity because of these microbial ecologies. And so what is it that we can learn from those, and how do we use them in agriculture? And as Terry truly said, to get that five-fold, 500% increase in productivity. It goes beyond that, but basically we have rainforests on sand dunes, the world's most bioproductive terrestrial system on effectively cut glass, crushed glass, silicon dioxide, and yet how does it function? And the challenge, and we were talking about this in CSIRO soils back in the 70s, right? What are the processes that drive that? And can we understand, respect, and then harness some of that knowledge to put into agriculture? Because in a sense, feeding the 10 billion people that will be on this planet by 2050 all depends on that. More than feeding them, making sure they have the nutritious food, the food with the nutritional integrity, the 50 essential minerals, cofactors that we need for our health. How do we ensure we have that? Because at the moment, we're hitting a catastrophe, not just in terms of hunger, in terms of the actual subclinical malnutrition of 70% of us, because we're not getting that nutrition, we're not getting the preventative health that comes from that. So basically, that's what I wanted to frame out in this discussion. We've only got very short time, so we won't go into all the details, but I certainly wanted to raise it. But the other wise thing, of course, you always have to sort of make the punchline at the beginnings so we can repeat it at the end and reinforce it. And it is very, very simply, yes, we must regenerate the Earth's soil carbon sponge, and it's only through regenerating the sponge that we can regenerate the hydrology, rehydrate the biosystems, and of course, if we can do that, we can naturally and safely cool the planet this decade. Now, we'll put that out there. We're not going to talk about all the physics and stuff behind that, but yes, we can. And of course, this is exactly what you, as land managers, your empowerment as the only point of agency humans have on this planet, it's farming. It's actually through you, through farming, that we can actually both regenerate, rehydrate, cool, and secure that safe future. So that's really fundamentally important. But basically, let's start with, in a sense, that big picture that Alan mentioned. There are about 14 billion hectares of ice-free land on this planet. They're not making any more of it. In fact, some of it's going to go under with sea level rise, right? And all of that was basically vegetated 8,000 to 10,000 years ago in the start of the Holocene. And we've been very, very effective, as Terry said, in a sense, in mining that land. We've taken 6.3 billion hectares of primary forest and basically converted into farmland. We've got about 3.5 billion hectares of forest left. We've taken about 4 billion hectares of cropping and intensive grazing land, and we're actually bringing that down to its knees. We've more or less oxidised half the carbon out of that land. And on top of that, we've taken some 5 billion hectares of what was formerly rangelands, grasslands, and we've very successfully turned that into 5 billion hectares of man-made desert and wasteland. So we are really quite a fundamental geological, hydrological force on this planet. And basically, we're still doing that. It's still happening. We are aridifying and degrading our climates, our soils, our biosystems, and we're seeing that everywhere. Australia is in the front line of that. We're more or less locked in on a 30% loss of rainfall due to the climate change and then the changes in pressure zones and so forth. So Southern Australia is in for 30% less rainfall, but far more seriously, we're in for a whole lot of unreliability, variability, extremes. And in fact, and basically it's all documented in science, Schellenhuber and what have you, it is the accelerating, dangerous hydrological extremes, the cyclones, the floods, the storms, the droughts, the aridification, the wildfires, that are the things that are actually going to collapse biosystems. They're happening now, they'll accelerate, and the real issue is, as again we saw, it's about the resilience of our farming systems. It's not just how much I can grow, but it's actually how long I can grow it for, the longevity of green growth. Am I sustaining healthy soils, healthy hydrology to keep that resilience, that longevity, that buffering functioning in my biosystems? And that will be make or break in farming, and of course it's already happening and it'll accelerate. And so the question, or the reality, the imperative is, what are we going to do? How do we face that reality? And especially in Australia. And of course the good news, the fundamental good news is, yes, we can do that all, we can do it this decade, we must do it this decade, but the only way we can do that is as nature has demonstrated and shown us. Because obviously nature has taken bare rock 420 million years ago and basically converted that bare rock into soil, into biosystems, into hydrology, and to the very, very productive ecosystems that we evolved in and are completely dependent on. As Terry said again, our whole economy's survival is fundamentally a function of the health of those ecosystems. We crash them, we crash ourselves. President Roosevelt made it very clear, a nation that destroys its soil destroys itself. Jared Diamond, it's collapsed civilizations. There's been 23 civilizations. Over 20 of them we look for in the dust of archaeology, because after about 300 years they've destroyed their soils, with that their hydrology, and with that their civilization. And in a sense, that's the imperative that humanity has, and it's got to face, but it's got about a decade to do that in. And of course, we come to the question then of nature. Well, look, how did nature actually do this recolonization? And of course, we can come to pedogenesis. Again, we've touched on it. Here is actually the fungi, the microbes, solubilizing rock, leaving behind the organic detritus, the humans, the humates, the glomalins, and that of course enhances its water holding capacity, that enhances its biofertility, the availability of those existing soil mineral nutrients, and of course through that plant growth and resilience. And we can accelerate that process as nature does. Nature uses it repeatedly after cyclones, hurricanes, tsunamis, what have you, basically regenerating rapidly healthy soils, very productive soils on these mineral substrates. And we can do that as well. And of course, one of the ways we do it, one of the key ways we do it, that nature actually has really perfected and really brought into evolution the last 30 million years, is grasslands. And in fact, it's the grasslands that are really fundamental, not just because they cover some 6 billion hectares of the residual vegetation on the planet, but they're the front line. They're the front line between desert and life. Okay, because regions where there's seasonally dry or seasonally cold climates or extremely stressed environments, it's grasses because of their seasonal hibernation capacity, opportunistically grow when they can, not grow where they don't have to. They're the only sort of biosystem that can actually have that buffering to actually colonize these inhabitants. And so it's our grassland, and then it comes down to the next thing, it's our grazing ecologies, the things that you guys have been sort of perfecting in holistic management, and they're the cutting edge. It's there, that's what Alan's talking about when he says it's management. I perhaps disagree with him talking to politicians. We've talked to a lot of politicians. I don't think you're going to get much progress there. You'll get bullshit, but that doesn't necessarily make it grow better. But the point is, it's actually our grazing management that's so important. And what's so important about grazing management, and in a sense what we don't understand as humans about grasses, is it's not the grasses, stupid, it's actually the symbioses that grasses represent. Because grasses are an absolute intimate symbiosis with their herbivores. And you can't have grasses, that's too, no, you can't have grasses, without those herbivores. They go together. And again, as we've raised, it's not just the grasses above the ground, but it's what's happening down under in the soils that matter. Okay, and we again did the studies in the 1970s. 40% of the carbon fixed by plants is getting invested basically in the roots, well actually 30% in the roots, another 40% as root exudates, so 70% carbon going down under to actually feed the microbial ecology. So it's a symbiosis of those microbial biosystems, the fungi, the symbiotic mycorrhizal interfaces with the soil, and that's what makes grasses unique. So it's actually that microbial ecology, both of those soil interfaces, but also the microbial ecology in the mobile biodigester that nature's evolved to turn those grasses back into biofertilizers and soil carbon and treading down of the stubble. We of course call them herbivores, but actually nature just has got them under the box mobile biodigesters. They're basically mobile biodigesters because basically they've got to move around, and instead of wheels, they were smarter. They said, if we put legs on these things, they're more effective, right? They can get around over logs and stuff, and so forth. And of course, it's not just cattle, basically everything, termites, insects, like the whole range of bioconversion. But it's, again, as Terry mentioned, it's maximizing photosynthesis. Our colleagues in Queensland, they're doing they're not doing that now, they were initially doing up to 200 tonnes of biomass per hectare per annum, sugarcane above ground, and probably another 150 tonnes below ground that we weren't recording. That's biomass, so divide by 0.6, not divide, multiply by 0.6, and you've got carbon sequestration. But it's not the amount of carbon we actually grow in photosynthesis that matters, it's what we do to it. Again, as Terry showed us, it's a question of how much of it is oxidized back to CO2 and how much of it is actually converted, again, through our friends, the fungi, into stable soil carbon, the humus, the glomalin, that builds soil capital. And at the moment, our industrial agricultural system, the more on, burning, over-fertilising, cultivation, biocides, bare fallowing, they're all driving oxidation of carbon. And in a sense, what Charles Keeling showed us in 58, the abnormal increase in CO2 levels from 1750 onwards was all driven by this oxidation, this accelerated oxidation of carbon from land biosystems. And of course, it's a symptom, right? We really sort of misunderstood that completely. Charles Keeling gave us a symptom. Here is CO2 going up. And we sort of say, oh, that must be the cause of climate change. Sorry, it's a symptom, but it's also the resource. It's a solution. It's a carbon, the resource that we have to put back into regenerating the Earth's soil carbon sponge to rebuild the hydrology and then to rebuild the Earth's cooling, the natural cooling. 95% of the heat dynamics of the blue planet is driven by water. The carbon component of the greenhouse effect drives some 4% of it. And it's only now by taking carbon from the air into the sponge, rebuilding the hydrology to rebuild those natural hydrological cooling processes that we have a hope in hell of surviving. We can do it just as nature does. Canberra, where I come from, is 12 degrees centigrade cooler on a hot summer's day in those regions where it's got its urban forest hydrologically cooling those regions compared to the concrete jungle new suburbs 5 kilometres down the road. So we can actively, safely, naturally cool. We can do that within a decade or less, but basically we have to change our mind. Again, Charles Massey, our friend, the emergent mind. How do we solve these problems? How would we step beyond? Okay, so the bottom line is we can do that. We can use grasslands. We can use these microbial ecologies both in the soil, and of course we can stop the degradation. We can stop the oxidation. And so we've got enormously powerful tools, and really it's all a question of, do we burn this carbon? Do we burn the carbon from our soils, from our vegetation, or do we let it biodegrade? It's a question of fire versus fungi. What's the balance? Of course, we always need some oxidation because we need that CO2 for photosynthesis. But it's that balance between, oxidation and carbon biosequestration. And that's really what land management is all about. And the powerful thing is that's what farming is all about. And that's what stewardship is all about. That is what we, in a sense, have to do and can do. Rapidly regenerate that sponge, that carbon sequestration process to rebuild healthy futures. And again, as we've seen, we've got innovative farmers in Australia, overseas, basically doing 10 tonnes of carbon per hectare per annum drawdown. I mean, we heard then Gabe and Dave Johnson saying, hey, what was it, 27 they were getting? And of course, Terry was saying, look, there's other people that are doing 5. Well, it's okay, it doesn't matter. It's not the number, it's the fact that you're doing it, that you're actually in that biosystem maximising that carbon drawdown. Because every gram of carbon that you're putting into your soil is holding up to 8 grams of extra water in that organic matter matrix, and up to 20 grams if that carbon is building well-structured matrices of soils. Every gram of carbon we're putting into that soil is massively increasing the biofertility of that soil without having to add any extra nutrients. Why? How? Well, very simple. I mean, soils are basically stardust from 4.6 billion years ago, containing all the elements that life needs, but mostly it's unavailable. 98% of the nutrients in a soil is unavailable. Even the nutrients we're putting on as fertilizer either get occluded as iron, aluminium oxide, or they get leached or volatilized and lost. And really, it's about the availability of those nutrients, not how much is in that soil, how much we've added. It's the availability. And again, we come back to microbial ecology, building the biology of those soils, because the fixation, solubilization, access, uptake, and cycling of nutrients, those processes, each one of them is totally driven by these microbial ecologies, by our fungi, largely. And again, that's the point of leverage, and that's where, in a sense, as I said in the beginning, 46 billion years of evolution when Australia left Gondwanaland and started drifting north. 46 billion years of evolution to perfect these biosystems. And that's, in a sense, what puts Australian agriculture, potentially at a global forefront leadership position. So look, globally, we've got some enormously powerful adventures and opportunities to go into, because, as we say, we have a lot of degraded wasteland that we can regenerate using these systems. We're going to have 10 billion people. Each of those people will need food, obviously, water, food, stability, 7 missed meals between social stability and chaos. So, hey, it's critical. But the only thing that can produce that food are grasslands. Not only, but the key thing is grasslands, because where do our grains come from? Where does our energy come from? And where does our proteins come from? Every person needs 150 grams thereabouts of quality protein per person per day. And again, it's the grasslands and the herbivores and the ecological sustained management of those herbivores, whether it's for milk or eggs or meat, which are then fundamental in providing that grassland. 2 minutes time, okay. Finished. Okay, well look, thank you very much. So, we're management. So management's about time, and so time's up, go. But the point is, the punchline, yes, regenerate the Earth's soil carbon sponge. It's in your hands. You are the solution. You're standing on it. It's your soils. But if we can do that, we can safely, naturally rehydrate our landscapes, cool those landscapes, that planet, and secure our safe future. Thank you very much.